Greetings. My ancestral name is Tatsha, and my given name is Mark Putlasley. I'm a member of the Tu-Deh-Kah Nation located in South Central British Columbia, and I'm the Director of Economic Policy at the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, and I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Musqueam Nation in Vancouver. The Coalition is a group of over 75 First Nations across Canada who are interested in being commercial partners in major projects proposed on our territories. This session is sponsored by the National Bank of Canada, who is a champion of Indigenous economic self-determination. National Bank was instrumental in bringing together this all-Indigenous panel that demonstrates the potential for partnerships that highlights how environmental, economic, and commercial reconciliation can improve the entire Canadian economy. It is my honor to moderate this discussion on successful Indigenous corporate partnerships in the cleaner energy net zero sector. Canada, along with the rest of the world, must achieve a net zero carbon neutral state by 2050 or risk catastrophic environmental consequences. For decades, climate change has been a reality faced by Indigenous people who reside far from major population centres. But in recent years, the present danger of climate change has come to us and the rest of Canada. Heat waves, droughts, hurricanes, retreating ice caps, and forest fires now impact every part of the continent, urban and rural. Here in my territory this week in British Columbia, we've seen devastating rains and floods, which have destroyed many of our roads and transportation corridors. To prevent even worse changes, the International Panel on Climate Change has called for limiting temperature rise to around 1.5 degrees Celsius and preventing the worst impacts of climate change by reaching net zero emissions of carbon dioxide by mid-century. Achieving net zero by 2050 means that our economy ideally emits no greenhouse gases or is carbon neutral by offsetting any emissions that have not been eliminated, including actions such as planting trees or using technologies that can capture carbon before it is released into the atmosphere. But reaching net zero by 2050 will not be easy. It will require fundamental transformation in virtually all aspects of our economy. Most of the solutions for achieving net zero by 2050 rely on using Indigenous lands and Indigenous resources to build cleaner energy infrastructure and extraction projects that are estimated to cost up to $6 trillion US. This includes new cleaner energy options, renewable energy power stations, expanded transmission lines, carbon capture and storage facilities, battery storage, and new mines to provide the raw materials needed for electric vehicle battery production. However, given the state of Indigenous rights and court decisions in Canada and the recent passing of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People into Canadian law, it is not unreasonable to assume that very few of the cleaner energy projects we collectively need to protect our shared atmosphere will not happen in a timely manner without Indigenous people as key partners. What tools do industry, governments, investors, and asset managers need to support successful partnerships with Indigenous people in this critical area? How will we collectively attract the investment we need to capture this enormous market opportunity? Today, we have a panel of 4 of Canada's leading cleaner Indigenous partnered energy projects that point the way to how we as a country can build essential climate infrastructure that will attract investment, save the planet's atmosphere, respect Indigenous people's rights, and ensure that we all prosper from the transition to a new, more sustainable future. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Chief Charlene Gale of the Fort Nelson First Nation in British Columbia, Matt Jamieson, President and CEO, Six Nations of the Grand River Development Corporation in Ontario, and Chief Crystal Smith of the Haisla Nation in BC. I'd like to ask each of you to briefly introduce your project to our audience. I will start with Chief Charlene Gale.
Thank you, Mark. I'm pleased to be here on this panel with other exceptional leaders who have built opportunities for their nations in clean energy. Thank you, Matt and Crystal, for joining us today. I'm looking forward to this panel. So I'm speaking to you today from my home in Fort Nelson First Nation, which is part of the Treaty 8 territory in northeastern BC. Before I begin, I want to thank the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnership for always including an Indigenous focus to your annual conference, and to the National Bank for sponsoring today's panel. Thank you, Mussy. There are a lot of positive stories to be shared about how Indigenous communities are taking part in building our own infrastructure networks. And so I'm pleased to be here to share my story with all of you here today. In addition to my role as Chief of the Fort Nelson First Nation, I'm also the Chair of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition, which is a national First Nation-led organization, business capacity organization. The coalition services are provided to over 77 First Nations in 7 provinces and territories to help our members arrive at informed business decisions regarding our participation in large-scale infrastructure and natural resource projects. These experiences have helped shape my views on what I'll talk to you about today. My home community has made it a priority that we be fully involved in the development of our territories and that we benefit from the wealth being generated from our lands. Our latest opportunity has been the advancement of the Tu-Deh-Kah geothermal project. And Tu-Deh-Kah in our Dene language means steam water, which is very fitting for the geothermal project. And the project is owned by Fort Nelson First Nation, making it the only 100% Indigenous owned geothermal project in Canada. Our territory is located in the heart of BC's oil and gas producing country. My nation has seen the full spectrum of impacts of resource development, both in a good way and in a bad. So I think it's only fitting that our geothermal project is repurposing a spent gas well to supply what could be one of the cleanest renewable project sources in Canada. The resource is powerful enough to produce 7 to 15 megawatts of electricity, along with enough steam and heat to power a commercial greenhouse operation. And we're really excited about what that could mean for food security in our territory, and especially for the people, our cousins that live up north. The power of the project produced is significant to meet electricity needs of Fort Nelson, my nation, the municipality, and the industrial sites, which is an important factor as the current power supply comes from a gas-fired power plant that is reaching the end of its useful life cycle. Our long-term vision for this project is to see it replace the current gas-fired electricity with clean geothermal power, directly contributing to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in our region. This gas plant has been running in our territory for many years, and in British Columbia it was one of the biggest greenhouse gas emission contributors in the province of BC, which also made them be one of the highest taxpayers. So with the downturn economy, we haven't had a lot of those emissions up in the air. But I believe projects like the Tu-Deh-Kah and other Indigenous-led projects being featured on this panel are only the beginning of Indigenous leadership in the clean energy space. As the world makes a push towards net zero by 2050, I think it's really critical that Indigenous communities play an important role in the policy and project development required to achieve it. There's a lot of challenges, we face as we try to push these projects forward with policy that doesn't meet the needs of our communities. So we need to work together to find ways to overcome that and to ensure Indigenous people are involved in those policy changes. The opportunity for our nation to participate with government and the private sector will be many, as there is a need for a major amount of infrastructure to be built to meet this demand. All this infrastructure in some form or another will cross Indigenous lands in Canada. So it's something that we have to think as we move forward, as we build projects in Canada, is how do we work with Indigenous people and how do we partner with Indigenous people? So hopefully we can get into some of that discussion today too, because partnership and co-development of infrastructure with Indigenous communities is and will continue to be a way of the future. And so I want to thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to the discussions that will follow. Masi Cho, hi, and thank you.
Thank you, Chief Charlene. Mr. Jameson, would you like to tell us about your project?
Sure, and great. Thanks, Mark, and thanks to National Bank for organizing the event. And it's my pleasure to share the stage with 2 female chiefs who are blazing trails in their area, Chief Gale and Chief Smith. It's an honor. As for Six Nations, if you don't know, Six Nations is the most populated First Nation in Canada. We're located just west of the GTA, and the Six Nations Development Corporation is effectively the economic arm for our community. We were organized to engage in business using good government systems and governance systems so that we can be a good and effective counterparty to corporate Canada. And we've achieved much success in that regard. Starting in 2009, we began investing in the renewable energy space. And as of today, we're a counterparty or an investor in almost 1,000 megawatts of wind and solar farms in and around the region of Six Nations. Of course, that's an industry that we can very closely embrace because it's aligned with our values of sustainability and is focused on environmental measures and greenhouse gas reduction. You know, as we've gone through the development cycle and participation in the energy space, we've seen things firsthand from the function and operation of our investments, and that would be primarily energy curtailment in some of our renewable energy assets. So effectively, when the wind turbines are functioning and the solar power panels are producing, they're not being consumed by the grid and they're unfortunately lost. And that power is not harnessed for the future. And what's happened here in Ontario, there's been a narrative that's somewhat given a poor view towards renewables as, you know, not an efficient means of generating power, when in fact they are. We just lack the tools to make them effective. And so for us, our project is the United Energy Storage solution, which will be a 250 megawatt nameplate capacity battery storage facility with 1,000 megawatt hours. This has a 4-hour cycle time. And effectively, what this battery will be is, well, one of the largest, if not the largest in Canada, and one of the top 3 largest in North America when it's completed. And we expect it to begin construction in the spring of 2022. Effectively, what this battery will do, it's a grid-facing solution, so it's not a tool that operates behind the meter to skirt any global adjustment charges. This is in fact a battery that serves the ratepayers on the grid. The grid in Ontario, and I think grids generally across the world, are an antiquated system of, you know, wires that connected to assets in the way in which they've always been built. And there was never really a mechanism that would allow a two-way flow of electrons back and forth. A battery technology has the capability to do that, effectively harness energy when it's not needed and store it for a rainy day when it is. And through that mechanism, the battery storage, we're able to unlock inefficiencies in the grid, be able to maximize the utility of the renewable energy assets that we already have, start to put downward pressure on new gas plants because, you know, as a gas plant operates, it has a minimum runtime, and its efficiency really isn't something that can compare with a battery storage, which is almost an instantaneous power requirement when a manufacturing facility might need it or when the grid requires it. So, I mean, it's really an innovative technology. We're excited by the prospect. And you know what? It's an example of what can be accomplished when an Indigenous community gets organized and prepared to do business. We put our money where our mouth is. And in this project, we've been a 50-50 development partner with a great partner, Enerstore, who are based out of Toronto and are one of the preeminent developers. But, you know, we are a 50-50 development partner, and we have been lock and step with Enerstore every step of the way. And they know our values and our systems here, what's important to us. And we, in turn, are collaborative in nature with them to pursue something that creates value, and not only for us from a development perspective to learn, but also for the ratepayers and our surrounding neighbors. So I'm great and happy to be on the panel, and you know, look forward to further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Chief Smith.
Thank you. I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for asking me to participate in this panel, and more so to the other 2 panelists. I've always admired the work of Chief Charlene Gale, and listening to her speak, I'm very honored to be on the panel with you today. So I'm here to speak on behalf of Cedar LNG, and Cedar LNG, like Charlene, our territory, we aren't new to industrial development. Industrial development has occurred in our territory for 50 plus years, and throughout those years, previous leaders that have sat at the table, specifically in my chair, had always had a vision of wanting a share and a say of what happens in our territory in regards to economic development. And, you know, as the years progressed, we continuously worked and strived for that share in how in the wealth that was generated, and a say in how the industry developed within our territories. And as we were going through negotiations for Coastal GasLink and the LNG Canada project in 2014, 2015, our team at the time of consultants, lawyers, and our leaders at the time had come up with the concept of furthering our vision of being owners of a facility, and had started the work within the negotiations to achieve that, and were very successful in that negotiation with Coastal GasLink and LNG Canada for 400 MMCF of capacity off of the Coastal GasLink pipeline. So as we progressed through those negotiations and did all the work in support of Coastal GasLink and LNG Canada, our project, Cedar LNG, became a reality to our community when LNG Canada announced their final investment decision, and likewise with Coastal GasLink. So since then, we've been working very diligently in regards to filling and getting the necessary partners and aligning everything that we require for the project to be successful since 2017, approximately, and around that time. You know, this is, and before we started the panel and this discussion, you know, reflecting on where we've come from and where we're at, and the amount of effort, time, sleepless nights, thinking about the progress of this project. So in 2016 or 18-19, we started to explore looking for a partner that had the expertise, but also the financial background to be able to, in partnership with us, bring this project to success. Within the last year, I'm proud to say that we've announced that Pembina is now our partner, 50-50 in Cedar LNG, and we are progressing this project through the EA process, and definitely are doing all of the necessary work in regards to moving this project to FID. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Smith. You touched on the first question I was going to ask all of you. When you started, you mentioned your partners, how this project came to be. Mr. Jameson, you mentioned that this is a very important project right now in terms of servicing the grid just outside Toronto. Do you want to speak to a little bit about how your project came to be and the process it took to find the right partner?
Yeah, sure. You know, so we've had a presence in the market for quite some time as an active investor in the renewable energy space. So lots of players in the energy space know who we are. And Enerstor, which is a company in Toronto who ultimately is our development partner, I've known the principals of Enerstor since as far back as 2010, working on other projects in the industry. And you know what, really, it was a meeting of the minds at a conference one night, and we had a conversation about what they're doing to develop and what our aspirations were. We're talking about the impacts of energy curtailment and the inefficiencies in the grid. And we said, you know what, why don't we put our minds together and look at an innovative solution to change the narrative of the energy space moving forward. And that was way back in 2016. And you know, since that time, we've been working together, exploring, you know, what would the requirements be in order to advance a project. Of course, you know, in an energy grid that doesn't have large-scale utility battery storage, you know, the biggest hurdle is how do you convince the governments or the counterparties on the contract, the independent electricity system operator in Ontario, that the value proposition for battery storage makes sense. And so it was a number of years went into engaging in dialogue to help educate and mitigate some of the negative perceptions around battery storage, and you know, it's taken a long time. We're fortunate to have found a counterparty in Enerstore who have the horsepower, who have the experience. As I mentioned, they are the preeminent energy developer, battery storage developer in the country. And so we started off on the right foot with the right relationship, with a shared vision, and you know, it has served us very well. But I would say that goes, you know, in order to embrace those types of ideas, those types of opportunities, you need to know what you want as a community. You need to be laser focused in on why you want to do it, and then, you know, find the right partner who embraces the same value set. Work together collaboratively to make sure that your interests are protected right from the beginning. You know, I've made it a part of my mission here through this project to make sure that our fingerprints, our DNA, is on this project, because you know, it's a $500 million project. It's a significant investment for our community. As a 50-50 developer, we have a lot at stake. And you know, any economic development person will tell you in Indigenous country, you're only as good as the last project that failed. And so failure for us is not an option.
Great, thank you. Chief Gale, I had the same question to you about the partnerships in terms of technical or financial. Can you describe how your project came to be? Well,
thank you for the opportunity, because just listening to the other two panelists, it's quite the same. You know, our council had been working on this for some time, since 2017, and they had gone to a conference where there was a presentation put on by Geoscience BC talking about the Clark Lake Field, which is adjacent from our community. And at the time, you know, there was other Treaty 8 nations there, and they were listening to the discussion. And one of the main things that, you know, was discussed is an energy purchasing agreement, which we know is very challenging to get in the province of British Columbia right now. There's only so many nations that have been allotted one, and, you know, a lot of nations are looking at doing projects that are close to home. So at the time, we just had that discussion about what could be. And, you know, that kind of brought us back home after the conference, and the discussion kind of kept going on. And through partnerships through the federal government and the provincial government, and, you know, other organizations like the New Relationships Trust, Western Economic Diversification Canada, and Geoscience BC, Barclay Group, just coming together to talk about what is the opportunity. So we had applied for many of the grants that were offered to, you know, organizations to apply for, and we were very successful on many fronts. But it just shows you what can be done when, you know, partners, investors, governments, you know, work with First Nation people to make these projects really come alive, because I don't believe that we would not be as successful as we are if it wasn't for everyone coming together to really try to get this project off the ground. And we continue to foster those relationships and give them updates on the projects, because at the end of the day, I think, you know, renewable projects in Canada are so important, and, you know, we need to set an example that, you know, we can transition to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We can contribute to net zero by 2050. And this is just another great example of how a nation can be successful and, you know, really bring in people to work together. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Which is fascinating about all three of these projects is how much dedication and support and energy each of you put into these things. Projects in First Nations communities at times have extra challenges in the fact that we can see the opportunities as Indigenous people, but as you pointed out, sometimes it's harder to convince those companies that this is a way to go. It's a commercial success. So to Chief Smith, I have a question to you, and this is an answer that would be given to the technical, financial, legal companies that are watching today. What advice would you give to them if they are just starting out and are interested in trying to find a First Nations partner for a cleaner energy net zero project? What advice would you have for them?
First of all, I'd always love answering this question with hire one of our people. You know, it always adds to the, and this person can be in an advisory role. They can now help you navigate you know, how the communities run and give you insight as to how to build that relationship. First of all, hire one of our people. I think second, and the most important one, putting that aside, is essentially what is acceptable to the First Nation. the commodities and the project and what you're bringing to the community needs to be something that is not only acceptable at the leadership level when it comes to our chief and councils, but the membership in general. I think that is a huge important piece of introducing projects, is being and educating the membership. And I think what we've taken into account throughout all of these projects that have been proposed for our territory, we've got aluminum smelters, we've had methanol, we've had LNG, we've had you name it, we've had the proposals come to our table. And it comes down to the acceptance of the community and how you approach getting that information, that educational pieces in front of the membership. Is essentially us as chief and council receive our mandates from our membership. So taking that into consideration, once that portion is completed, I think it's important to keep that communication going, the educational pieces going, and taking away key factors that are most important to our people when it comes to impacts in your territory around cultural aspects. So within our territory, Ulukan is our most valued source in our territory. So taking into account timelines and potential impacts of our Ulukan. And that's just one prime example of the educational pieces when it comes to project development. But LNG Canada and their approach in how they did the development aspect of their project is they built relationships first. And that was not something that was only at an engagement level. You take a look at the CEO and CEO down, that was the most important value when it came to any level of management within their project. And honestly was the key to their success. So having that, and you find within major companies that a little bit of that culture gets lost between management levels. And I think it's important for that practice, the smart practice of community engagement, community relationships, is hugely important. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Jameson, a slight twist on that question. There was a question that came in on the audience here, and the question is this, what has industry, in your experience, done well in terms of early and often engagement? We heard much from Chief Smith about what has been done well in her project. But the one question she's added on the end is, what not to do's? So I see everyone smiling because we've all been in a situation where we've seen what not to do's. Do you want to share some of those just so people know what not to do if they're going to be entering into this space?
Yeah, sure. So I think what not to do also is a good indication of some of the things you can do, right? The first thing in my mind is, if you're looking to partner with an Indigenous community, in the context of how you approach them, it's not. Don't approach it from a duty to consult exercise. I see this all the time, coming with a checkbox and wanting to say, oh, I consulted with you, and I want to paper all of the conversations that you've had. In fact, one time I was at a conference in Toronto, and I used to smoke cigarettes, I admit that, but back in the day, I was outside having to smoke, and this guy comes up to me on the street, he says, hey, how are you doing, man? Good. And he's so-and-so, and wouldn't you know, 5 or 6 months later, I'm reading an engagement report, and that conversation showed up in that consultation report. And it was like baffling to me how that could happen. So don't do those things. Don't look at the duty to consult as the means of which to build a relationship. It's not. It's an obligation, legal obligation. That's the way you view it. If you have to look at how to interpret that rule, you're coming with the wrong mindset. You also need to understand that the chief is often the economic development person, often the housing person, often the social services person, and they're busy. And so if all of your communications hinge on the chief or the chief's office, you may not get a lot of traction because they're busy folks. And engage early and often. We've talked about that. I would say the failure to provide a base case understanding what the value proposition of the business is. You know, communities don't know what your business is. They don't know what the value stack of opportunity is. They want to know how they can participate. And it's incumbent upon the company who's approaching the community to help educate them on what those opportunities are. Don't let the community go down a rabbit hole of discovery to spend 6 months trying to uncover the stuff that you already know. Give them a playbook. Let them be part of the solution. And that's the way you build trust. That's the way you build a relationship. And, you know, as you go down that process, make sure you provide capacity funding so they can get independent advice, legal advice, professional advice, so that they understand what those opportunities might be. And then, you know, make sure you understand the community. Spend some time there. Understand their community dynamics. Understand their cultural needs. What's their priorities, not your priorities as a company. At the end of the day, when you chalk it all up and draw a line under it, the equation, the bottom line is you got to earn their trust. And earning trust is not a duty to consult exercise. It's something that's earned over time, and you build it through being engaged and personable and understand their dynamics. So I know I didn't really take a negative view on what not to do, but I think hopefully some of those points helps folks know maybe those are some of the things you can do to make the right approach.
Thank you. I am still laughing at you showing up on the report for consultation because you had a cigarette with someone.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's happened to all of us, where you've sat down and helped somebody and it's shown up as a sign that there's support in the community because you spoke to someone. I know we have two chiefs here, and both of you were smiling and nodding as Matt was speaking. Charlene, Gail. Chief Gail, would you like to share about what not to do? Maybe you have a story too about showing up in a report, or maybe something
it's
like that.
Funny that Matt says that because, you know, I'm in British Columbia and he's on Ontario, and it's nothing more frustrating to read a consultation report and, oh, met in the freezer aisle at IGA, you know, and we had a discussion. Like, that's not consultation and it's not meaningful, and it just doesn't create a great relationship moving forward. So thank you for bringing that up, Matt. I think what's important in just to say is, like, if you're looking at developing a project in a territory of a First Nation, then come at day one and start discussing that project with us then. We're stewards of our land. We know where our values are on the land. We know where you can and can't go. And we have a lot of people that continue to utilize the land, whether they're hunting, fishing, trapping, or gathering, or continue to live out on our reserves that are, you know, very remote and never were pushed off by the Indian agent. We got to take in consideration that there's those people in our communities that still live off the land. But I think it's just important to say that our main goal for First Nations is to enhance our economic well-being for our members. And, you know, through the work we're doing through the First Nation Major Projects Coalition, we're supporting our members to make informed business decisions in major resource and infrastructure projects. And our members have very big ambitions. You know, this is how this discussion and these projects come about, is by engaging with our members, whether that's through the industry engagement event, talking about some projects you may be working on that, you know, it's in one of our members' territories. And one of the things that our members are really interested in is equity ownership. It's the key to making our futures brighter. These projects are happening in our territory and we want to be a part of them. So I encourage investors to really work with partnering with First Nations, because I believe that regulatory approvals will be smoother. You'll have project development costs will be lower. And, you know, like Crystal said, hire our people. We know the land. We can make your project a lot smoother. And, you know, investment risk will be reduced. You know, you'll have a good partner that is familiar with the land and the territory for thousands of years. The environmental impacts can be lessened, and you'll have more Indigenous workers on the ground, more Indigenous business owners, and you'll see the community contribute to helping you with the project and contribute to the industry that's happening around them. And that's really what we want, is to be a part of our economies in a meaningful way, where we can not just put bread and butter on our table, but go above and beyond that, and, you know, work with our local municipalities and so forth, bringing our sister nations in. These opportunities don't only happen for our nation. We really do pull everyone in. And if you go to a First Nation community that has a lot of capacity, you'll really see that we're a very diverse workforce. And, you know, we really like working with other people and bringing the non-Indigenous community to be a part of our projects too. So thank you, Mark, for the opportunity. Good question.
Thank you. So we've been talking now very much to the developer audience, the proponents, the financiers, the people in the projects who are initiating them. But as you've said already, there's sister First Nations who are looking to become involved. Chief Gale, you mentioned that. So I'm going to direct this question to you, Chief Smith. What advice would you give to another First Nation that's looking at the success of your community right now in being able to get this thing going, this project? What advice do you give to another First Nation looking to start this process? How should they begin if they want to get involved in a project?
I was just reelected in June of this year, and after being reelected, I was fortunate enough to have two other nations reach out to me to have both of not only just myself but our two leadership tables to sit down and to discuss just economic development in general. And you know, the conversations were allotted for 2 to 3 hours. But went well over the allotted time span, just talking about, you know, our experience, and not just in a I like to say 50,000 foot high conversation. Like, we were talking about details of, you know, mistakes that we've made over the years, what I would have done differently, or what portion of the process I would have focused more on to avoid the mistakes that we did make. So essentially reaching out to First Nations that are willing, and we're very willing to have discussions with other First Nations communities in regards to economic development, and you know, sharing those stories. One portion that I definitely would give advice to, that is the most important one that I felt was necessary to share with those two other nations, was the communication to your membership. Have them on board right from the beginning. That goes to every level of the project. Introducing, getting the educational pieces in, having the conversations, because there are knowledge holders in our community. There are experts in our community that we need to hear from as well, and to hear their concerns and start addressing them from the beginning to ensure that we are meeting their needs is most important.
Thank you. Mr. Jameson, same question to you. What advice would you give to another First Nation looking to replicate your community success?
You know, I get approached a lot, Mark, from other communities who've seen what we've done, and you know, sometimes I have somewhat of a blunt message. You know, we as an Indigenous people, you know, we are asserting our rights in many ways, and of course we have, you know, UNDRIP, TRC, Supreme Court rulings, all of these, call them instruments that are tipping the scale in favor of working with Indigenous communities. But what goes hand in hand with that is an obligation for those communities, us, to get organized, to get prepared with the right governance systems, the right business structure, so that we can participate in those business opportunities when they present themselves. You know, failing to seize an opportunity at that moment is doing an injustice to our future generations. So what we've done is we've spent a lot of time understanding the community dynamic here, what they like, what they don't like. Before we launched our corporation, we spent almost 3 years at people's kitchen tables and in community sessions to better understand what the sensitivities are around corporations and doing business with the outside world here in our community. And it really infused our company with our nationhood, and about who we are and how we want to operate. So we're very selective of our partners, but we're there. We do that because we understand the sensitivities of the community. Everything that we do is tied to our long-term community plan. So the businesses and the decisions that we make are longitudinal. They're not transactional. And you know, I would say that you know, long gone are the days where, you know, we just seek to partner with anybody because we want to participate in the economic development game. The clean energy economy is economic. If you don't have the right economic development foundational platform in your community, you'll continually struggle. And anybody who has worked in an economic development role in an Indigenous community will know that, you know, the most important project was the one that was just presented to Chief and Council the night before. And if you're the economic development guy, you're chasing continually new projects and you're not getting a lot done because there's not a foundational strategy of what you're trying to achieve as a community. And so that goes full circle back to what are your membership? What do they want? What are they prepared to support? And then build your strategy and structure up on achieving that goal. And if you can do that, align your long-term goals and build strategy around execution, you'll find the right partners, you'll find the right projects, and the path will be that much more certain.
All right, well, thank you. I'm watching the clock here. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I suspect for a lot of the participants who are watching right now, it's probably the first time they've seen an all-Indigenous panel speaking about the opportunities in clean energy, which is going to be one of the huge growth areas in the economy for the next 50 years. So I realize that each of you right now in your projects are in motion right now. You're building them, you're getting them ready. But looking forward, what have you learned right now or so far? Could you speak to how you might do a different project? So the next one, what have you learned? How has working on this project informed and educated you about what you do next time? So Chief Gale, I'll start with you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I think it just goes along with what Matt was saying, is that not all First Nations are positioned to be in a position to have a lot of capacity or know how to be involved in these business transactions. I have to say that's one of the biggest things that I have learned as an Indigenous leader, being on council since 2009, and going from joint ventures to EPA or economic benefit agreements and those kind of things that aren't meaningful or have a lot of ability for us to make changes or be meaningfully involved. So I just have to say, through the support of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition and the technical team there, they have the expertise and the capacity that has really helped guide us. And throughout the years of being a member of the coalition, they've built a lot of tools and supports that First Nations can bring home back to their membership. Like Crystal said, present in front of your community, make them understand what the goal is here and what we're trying to do. We need to really build up our own source revenue. That's what's really important here, because a lot of people don't realize that the federal funding we get does not help us offset the cost to look after our people and, to really build up our schools and our health centers. There's so many other pieces and components that, have to be into consideration. So if you're a struggling First Nation and you see a really great opportunity or a project that, in your territory you want to be involved in, you don't know where to start, please reach out to the coalition, because they've been a tremendous help. And that's where I would go for the next opportunity, whether that is the LNG coming back in our territory. If there's another facility or a gas plant, existing gas plant that's going to be fired up, we want to have a discussion about having equity in that project. So that is my advice to nations that need help or capacity to make informed business decisions. But it also goes to the investor. If there's a nation that you want to engage with and talk with and you need advice, or you'd like us to facilitate a discussion, please reach out to us. That's what we're here to do, and really foster relationships. We don't make a decision or on any or support any project. It's really has to come from the nation asking for that support. So just so that investors and other proponents know that it's really up to the nation to want to be involved in the project. So Mussy, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your information and about your projects with our audience today. As we close, I'd just like to reiterate that this panel has been sponsored by the National Bank of Canada, who has been a champion of self-Indigenous determination and has been a valued partner to many Indigenous nations across the country. And we are very proud to be part of this discussion today. If you have any further information, if you'd like any further information about these projects, you can go to the website of each of the communities here, or as Chief Gale has pointed out, the First Nations Major Projects Coalition at fnmpc.ca has a lot of the information about the projects you've heard here and about many others that are happening, not just in the clean energy space, but in other areas that Indigenous people and private partners are coming together to build across the country. So again, I thank you for your time today, and I thank our panelists, and I wish you all a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.